Hey everybody, I'm Brandon Grasley, and this is Grasley Games, and we're back for another episode of MTG Noob, learning some of the basics of Magic the Gathering. And this time it's a long one. We're talking about turn sequence, all of the things that happen during a player's turn. I'm not going to get into every tiny detail because there are many pages of rules for those sorts of things, but I'm going to give you the top-level view of every part of the turn and give you some tips and strategies on when is it a good time to play certain cards. So first, let's look at the list of phases, and there's a bunch of them. We have the untap, upkeep, and draw phases at the very beginning of a turn. Those happen usually very quickly. Then we have a first main phase, the combat phase, which is quite long. Main phase number 2. Then we have an end step and a cleanup step. Untapping is pretty straightforward. If you have cards that are tapped, you untap them. This is not something that is interruptible. Your opponent does not cast spells here, and neither do you. That's it. The upkeep step, if you have a card which tells you to do something at the beginning of your upkeep, now is the time. And so here's, for example, the Honden of Cleansing Fire. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 2 life for each shrine you control. And at this time, you can do stuff at instant speed, which means playing an instant spell or using an activated ability. And your opponent can do the same thing as well, both just on their own. They don't have to wait. And they can also do that in response to a triggered ability like this one that we see here. Notice this happens before your draw step, before you draw a card. On your draw step, there's your library. Draw a card, put it in your hand. It doesn't matter how many cards you have in your hand at this point. You can always draw a card unless your library is empty, and if it is, you're dead. During your main phase, number 1, you play a land. If you wish, you can play a land. You cast any of your own spells, or any type, artifacts or enchantments or instants or whatever, and you can activate any abilities on permanents on the battlefield or in your graveyard that you control. Your opponent can cast instant spells and can use activated abilities, but they can't cast things like sorceries or creatures. During combat, we have a series of steps. We have a beginning of combat, which is very often skipped in paper Magic especially. We declare attackers and blockers, we do combat damage, and then there's an end of combat, sort of a cleanup step. Let's look at that in more detail right now. So the beginning of combat is a step which we often use in Magic Online, but is not very much used in paper. In fact, unless you specifically say you want to go to beginning of combat and do stuff, it will be sort of automatically skipped in shorthand. So, for example, here we have Nivix Cyclops on the left. It has Defender, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it gets a boost, and it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So if you want to use it as an attacking creature, you have to boost it in this phase or earlier. You can't wait until the Declare Attackers step, because you can't cast spells during the Declare Attackers step before you declare attackers. Also, the Mistfire Adept, you see it has prowess, and so if I do something like casting Electrickery, it will turn on the Nivix Cyclops' ability, and it will give Mistfire Adept a +1/+1 at the same time. Now, there isn't really a good reason to do these things during your beginning of combat step. In almost any case, you might as well just cast the spell during your main phase, which will activate both of those abilities ahead of time. So don't wait. Do this Electrickery in your first main phase before you say that you want to start combat. So let's go to the Declare Attackers step. So here I have 3 creatures on my side of the battlefield, and I want to have all of them attack. So you move them forward a little bit on the battlefield, you push them towards your opponent, and then you turn them sideways. Now you'll notice that I did not tap the Steadfast Guard because it has Vigilance. Vigilance means that it will not tap just because you've attacked. And so that's kind of how that works. Now at this point, this is when your opponent might play a flash creature, or some other instant spell is fine. But they have an opportunity to cast instants, but that is all. If they do not put this creature out there during this phase, if they tried to wait till their Declare Blockers phase, it's too late. And just like us, they have the disadvantage of not being able to put new creatures out during the Declare Blockers step. It'll be too late at that point. Okay, so let's make this a little more complicated. We've decided to attack with our 3 creatures, and the opponent has these 4 creatures on the battlefield up ahead of us. Now, we are still in the Declare Attackers phase. We have an opportunity to cast any instant spells before we move to Declare Blockers. And so you'll want to say so when you are dealing with an opponent. You tap your creatures and move them forward and then say, I'm going to hold priority, or you say, I want to cast some spells before we move on to the Declare Blockers step. So this is a time where you might do something like casting Shock to, let's say, kill off that Steeple Rock, which is pretty dangerous up there, or maybe Unsummon to get rid of the Dragon-style twins. You want to do that now so that those creatures cannot block your own. And even if you were to unsummon the Dragon-style twins later after it has decided to block something, even if no damage has happened, it's too late and it will have effectively blocked something. You also have the chance to cast things like this. This is Grotesque Mutation. It gives your own creature, or any creature I suppose, but you'll do it on your own. It gives it +3/+1 and lifelink until end of turn. Now often you will want to wait a little while, but it can be a good disincentive. It might dissuade someone from wanting to block one of your creatures if you boost it up first. For example, you might cast it on your Rotting Mastodon hoping to get through for 5 damage, and maybe it won't get blocked. But you can also wait. It's often better to wait on a combat trick like this to play it during the declare blocker step after the blockers have been declared, and you can decide the best place to put it. Okay, so declare blockers. Let's get there. We've left all their creatures alone and we want to see what's going to happen. So the opponent, the defending player, will decide which of its creatures will block my own creatures. Now, it's important to note that they don't have to block at all if they don't want to, and they can put multiple creatures blocking a single one of ours. So, for example, they might decide the Gladecover Scout and the Canopy Spider will block the Goblin Chariot. Notice that those two together have 2 power, which will be enough to take out the Chariot's 2 toughness. But between them, they have 4 toughness, which the Goblin Chariot will not be able to overcome. The Steadfast Guard, they're going to leave alone, but they're going to block with the Steeple Rock, which has first strike, and Dragon-style Twins, which has double strike. Now, the Steeple Rock has flying, and the Rotting Mastodon doesn't, but that doesn't matter. As soon as the defending player has decided to use a flying creature as a blocker, then your creature will be able to hit it, whether it has flying or not. Okay, so let's see what happens here then. One more thing. The Canopy Spider, you can see we've moved it back behind the Gladecover Scout. When you're an attacking player and the defending player has decided to double or triple block, they're going to block with multiple creatures, you have to decide the order in which you're going to hit them. It's called ordering blockers. And here we've decided to hit the Gladecover Scout first and the Canopy Spider second. And that's because the first damage point will kill the Gladecover Scout, and there is no way to kill the Canopy Spider with our weak little Chariot down there. And over on the Steeple Rock and Dragon-style Twin side, we're going to do the same thing. Put the little guy, the Steeple Rock with its mere 1 toughness, we'll put it first so that the Rotting Mastodon can kill it, because we can't kill the Dragon-style Twins. Okay, let's do combat damage. We have first strike damage and normal damage. First strike happens for the Steeple Rock and also for the Dragon-style Twins, which you can't see now, but it has double strike as well. So it does both first strike and normal damage. Normal damage also happens with the Canopy Spider, Gladecover Scout, Chariot, Goblin Chariot, Steadfast Guard, and the Rotting Mastodon. The Steeple Rock does not do any normal damage, only first strike damage. So let's make it happen. The first thing that happens is the Rotting Mastodon will receive 6 points of damage, 3 from the Steeple Rock, 3 from the Dragon-style Twins. That's first strike and double strike damage during the first strike part of declaring combat damage. And then we move on. A whole bunch of stuff happens here. The Rotting Mastodon takes another 3 from the Dragon-style Twins, but not from Steeple Rock. And then its 2 points of damage are spread out. The first one kills off Steeple Rock, and then the second point of damage goes to the Dragon-style Twins. You can also decide to put both damage points on the Steeple Rock, but usually there is no reason to do that unless you wanted to avoid hitting something. Goblin Chariot does 2 damage to 1 to Gladecover Scout and 1 to Canopy Spider, and I missed putting it there, but those 2 each do a point of damage to the Goblin Chariot as well. Steadfast Guard is not hit, but it does hit the player for 2. So this is what happens in the end of combat step. Anything that has 0 or less toughness is gone, and everything else remains. Steadfast Guard is still there, Dragon-style Twins is there with 1 point of damage, and so is the Canopy Spider. Okay, we're out of combat and we're in our main phase. Number 2, we can play a land if we didn't already play one. You can only play 1 per turn, and usually it makes sense to play a land during your first main phase so you don't forget to. Sometimes you want to hold, if you only have 1 card in hand, for example, you might hold that land so that your opponent doesn't know that you don't have a combat trick. And then you can cast any other spells, creatures, enchantments, and so on. Generally, people play their creatures during this phase unless there's a reason not to, because that way they get to keep their lands open. That means available to tap, so that they seem more threatening during the combat phase. It's not usually advantageous to put extra creatures out during your first main phase. You might as well wait and do it during your second main phase. So that's a good habit to get into. At this time, also, your opponent can cast instant spells and use activated abilities just like before. Okay, then we have the end step. Not often do we have a lot happening in the end step, but here's an example. The Advocate of the Beast. At the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on target beast creature you control. We have one, a Colonian Tusker, and so we put that counter on there. It's now a 4/4. And that's kind of all there is to the end step, because the rest of this is actually cleanup. People often call this the end step, but during cleanup, we do a few things. First, we check to see if we have too many cards. You're only allowed to have 7 cards in your hand at the end of your turn. Here I have 9, and so I'll need to get rid of a couple of them, and I'm down to 7 now, which is fine. Another couple of things happen. Here I have Ascended Lawmage with 1 point of damage on it. We need to remove that point of damage. All damage is removed at the end of the turn during the cleanup step. And then you see here earlier, maybe I cast Defiant Strike, which gives a target creature +1/+0 until end of turn. That effect now ends at this point. It happens after the damage has been removed from creatures. And that's the turn sequence. That's all there is to it for the most part. I hope this has been educational and informative for you. If it has, I'd appreciate it if you hit like and hit subscribe and maybe share this with some friends. And hopefully this will help to solve any arguments that you've been having about what happens when during the turn sequence. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. GG. I'll talk to you soon.